Hello, and welcome to part 4 of the Beginner's Python tutorial series. In this video, we will take a look at functions, learning how to define them, pass them input, and receive output. We will also learn about an important part of programming, comments. Before we begin, if this video helps you out, remember to hit like and subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss another video. Without further ado, let's get started. So what is a function? A function is simply a section of code that has been written to do a specific task and can be called from somewhere else. It will often take in values which we call input and return values which we call output. If you don't understand these terms yet, don't worry, as I will explain them later in this tutorial. The easiest way to understand functions is to just get started writing them. So open up Visual Studio Code and let's take inspiration from our first Python script, in which we just wrote print hello world. Let's create a new file, and I'll save this as functions.py. Set this file type to all files, and save. To define a function, we use the def keyword, short for define, then specify a function name. I will call this function greet. After the name, we need a pair of parentheses. We will see why soon, and finally a colon. Now in this function, I will again type print hello world. For demonstration purposes, I will also add a print statement outside of this function, which will say print this is outside the function. Make sure the first print statement is indented to tell Python that it is part of the greet function, and the second one is not, meaning that it is not part of the function. This white space or blank line in between these makes no difference, as I could actually indent this and it would then be considered part of the function. Now let's open the integrated terminal and run this script with python functions.py. You will notice that only the second print statement was actually called. The reason for this is that when you define a function, it must be called manually for it to run. To call a function is very simple, and after we define the function, we can just type the name of the function, in this case greet, followed by a pair of parentheses to call it. Now if I run the script after having saved it, you will see this is outside the function, which we wrote here, and then after that the greet function, which prints hello world. If I try to call the function before it is defined, by putting greet at the top of the script, if I save and run, you will see that we receive an error which says name greet is not defined. This is because when you run a Python script, it is read line by line, and Python does not know that a function called greet exists when it is called, as you are defining it after you call it. To avoid this, just make sure to always define a function before you call it. Now that we know how to declare functions, we can get into their true power, input and output. Input and output simply refer to values either being given to a function to process, or values that a function gives us in return. For example, every time we type print, parentheses, and then a string, such as hello world, or this is outside the function, we have actually been calling a function called print created by the makers of Python. The input to the function are the strings of text that we pass in, and the output was the text being printed to the console. To allow a function to receive input, we can go into the parentheses after the function name. I'll just put this back at the bottom, and in these parentheses, we can write a variable name. In this case, I will call the variable literally name. Now, instead of just printing hello world, I'm going to modify this print statement to say print hello, and then after hello, comma space, and plus name, to say hello to the person we pass as input. The last thing we need to do is add a name into the function call, so say greet, and then inside the parentheses, and in quotation marks, write a person's name. I'll just say practical programming. Now if I run this script, you'll see this is outside the function, which we can actually get rid of now since we understand it, and then, more importantly, hello practical programming, which was our input to the function. You might not see the point of this yet, since it would be far easier to just write print hello practical programming as we did in the first tutorial. But what if we want to greet 3 people, or 10, or even 100? Instead of typing out the whole print statement each time, we can now just call the greet function, passing the name as input, and the function will do the rest for us. There is a principle in programming called the DRY principle, which is short for don't repeat yourself. This is important as repetitive code is often hard to read and could be designed far better. Let's take a look at another example. This time we will create a very slightly more complex function which will convert degrees Fahrenheit to degrees Celsius, and we will look at how we can use the output that it gives us. I will start with a new file and save this one as functions2.py. Save as file type or files and save. To make the function, I will again use the def keyword followed by the function name Fahrenheit to Celsius. You will notice that I'm joining the words of the function name with underscores, and I also did the same with the variable names. This is a convention in Python to use lowercase for function names and variable names, and join the words with underscores. Now I will add the parentheses for the function, and inside them I will add an input called Fahrenheit. Inside the function, I will say Celsius is equal to Fahrenheit minus 32, and then multiply the result by 5/9, which is just the formula for converting Fahrenheit to Celsius. Now underneath that, I will say return Celsius to return the value that we just obtained as the output. Under this function, I can now declare a new variable, which I'll call C, and set this equal to Fahrenheit to Celsius of 32 degrees Fahrenheit. This is new syntax, but when we say a variable is equal to a function, what it actually means is to assign the output of the function to the variable. So in this case, C should equal 0. With this, we can do many things with the value of C, or simply print the value of it to the screen, which I will do now. You might be starting to see the value of functions, as it would make a lot more sense to type Fahrenheit to Celsius than to say C is equal to this formula, and then just inputting 32 in here, as you wouldn't know what any of these values actually mean. And if you want to convert multiple values to Celsius, you would have to copy and paste this statement, putting in different values, which would all just end up being a confusing mess. Another important feature of any programming language is comments. A comment is a line in the script which is not executed when it's run, and can be used to explain what the code does. To write a comment in Python, you simply have to start the line with a hashtag, and then anything after that will not be executed. When writing a comment, you don't want to simply repeat exactly what your code does. So for example, if I was to comment this function, I wouldn't say return the input minus 32 and multiplied by 5/9 or anything along those lines, since we can see that just by looking at the code. Instead, we want the comments to be descriptive of what the code does, or what the purpose of it is, as opposed to what it literally does. In this case, the function name is already descriptive, so we probably don't need to add a comment. But in our first script, we could add a comment to this function, saying greet the user to make them feel welcome, or anything along those lines. In such a small and simple script such as this, we honestly don't need any comments. But when you get to larger scripts of hundreds or even thousands of lines, you will find that one day comments save your life when you forget why you wrote a particular block of code, or what some of the code exists to do. That's the end of this tutorial. Next week, we'll look at taking input from the user, which opens up a whole new world of possibilities. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.